Okay, so our passage has just been read to us, Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 to 12. And from this, within 10-ish minutes, I want to draw out 4 points to us. What can we learn from the wise men, the magi, the 3 kings, however we want to call them? Mostly it's the magi in the Bible, but we seem to call them wise men, don't we, for some reason. So what can we draw out for it, the good and the bad? Well, the first thing I want to look at is they were not afraid to ask questions. That's one thing I just want to look at briefly. They needed to have been careful who they said what to. That's one thing that we can draw out. That's a bit of a negative. That's a bit of a bad thing, that one there. But we can learn from that. The other thing we can learn from is they knew this baby was to be worshipped, just like those shepherds knew as well. And the fourth thing to draw out is they brought gifts. So 4 points just to look at very briefly. So the first one was they were not afraid to ask questions. And no matter how wise the wise men were, they knew that they didn't have all the answers. They knew that they needed to go to people who would be able to guide them on their journey. They stopped, as we heard, in Jerusalem, because that's where they thought a king would be born. And they needed to be guided on their journey. And I think it's a very, very quick and small point to make, is that's exactly the same for us. We need to remember we don't have all the answers in our Christian faith. Let's not fear asking questions. So the first thing for us to learn from these wise men is let's not fear asking questions. The second thing that we can draw out is they needed to be careful who they said what to. And we know, this is Christmas Day, I know, but this is a sad part of the story in knowing what happened after the Magi left and what Herod did in Bethlehem to every boy under the age of 2. Why have I added this in for us to learn from? It's because it's a real story. And we need to be real in our stories. The reality is, not everybody loves Jesus. Not everybody believes that God is the creator of all there is. The reality is there is evil in this world, and it comes from a place of hatred towards God. To use a word, secularism, just to pick one particular word, the reality of where we are in this country, as we've heard the national statistics saying that now we are under 50% of people who live in this country call themselves Christians, we're in a more secularized world. And the reality of that is, it's a numbing of the truth in a very pretty way. I just want to say that again. What secularism is, it's a numbing of the truth in a very pretty way. Secularism can sell you an untruth and make it sound like it's true, and make it sound like that's the best and actually the only way forward. We know, don't we, with the snake, back in Genesis, he used the tactic of deception. And I think very sadly, and we're guilty of this as well, is that deception was where the three kings fell over. And we too can be. But what does Jesus himself say? Well, I want to look at just very quickly Matthew chapter 10 and verse 16. It says, I am sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore be as shrewd as snakes and innocent as doves. And I just looked up in a commentary what this really means. Because I thought, I'm quite perplexed by this whole idea of being as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves. And it was in Matthew Paul's commentary. He says this, the text teaches us this. That wisdom may dwell with prudence, with common sense, and that all common sense must be attained with innocence. I think that for me is a real truth that we need to hold on to, that actually we need wisdom from God. You know, hindsight is a wonderful thing, isn't it? And I just want to encourage us this morning not to be those Christians that regularly say, with hindsight, I should have. And say, oh, actually, I wish I never. Actually, what can we learn from the three kings, the wise men, the magi? Is that actually we need to be careful of who we say what to. Let's get on something a little bit more jolly and a little bit more positive, since it is Christmas Day. The third thing I want to draw out is they knew this baby was to be worshipped. Now, what does that really mean? Upon reaching Jesus, there was one thing that was on their mind to do, and that was to worship. And I want to ask the question, do you worship Jesus? Now, when I say, do you worship Jesus, I don't just mean, do you sing songs? Do you come to church and sing worship songs? There is a part of worshiping, but actually, that is not all that worship is. And I think there's a challenge for us all this morning to find out what it really means to be worshipping Christians. What does it mean for you really to practically, day in, day out, worship Jesus? What does your lifestyle look like? What do the things you say, you think, you do, what do they mean if you are a worshipper of Jesus? Just like these magi. And the last thing, just to draw out, is that they brought gifts. Gold to show his kingship, frankincense to show that he is to be worshipped, and myrrh to show that his purpose in being born was to die. And the kings, the wise men, the magi, they brought gifts. And my question to you, to myself, is, what gifts do you bring to Jesus? There's that, I'll be honest, it's not one of my favourite carols to sing in a bleak midwinter, because it just, for me, it's just quite depressing, really. But it's sort of the frosty winds may moan. It's like, oh dear, it's bad enough living through Christmas, let alone, you can tell I really enjoy the Christmas period, don't you? By that enduring Christmas. But the idea of frosty winds moaning at the same time. But the last verse, let me read it to you. It says this, what can I give him, poor as I am? If I were a shepherd, I would bring a lamb. If I were a wise man, I would do my part. Yet, what I can give him my heart. And that, I think, for us is a gift that we can give to Jesus this Christmas time. And it's a gift that we can give every day. It's an act of worship to give your heart. Gold. We can bring a golden heart, if you like, to Jesus. Making Jesus your king. Telling him that you are going to live by his rules. Now, it's not something we overly like, is it? The kind of this idea of Jesus giving us a set of rules to follow. It's kind of this strictness of it. But I think, actually, the idea of Jesus' rules, God's living God's way, is not just it's a good way to live. It's not just about it's a high standard. It's not just saying it's the best way to live. For me, living by Jesus' rules is the right way to live, the only way to live. To give him my heart is to do as he requires of us. We can give him our frankincense. Everything you say, think, and do to be for God's glory. Give him your heart. Give him your everything. Give him your words. Give him your actions. Give God your thoughts. And may it be for his glory. And for myrrh, that sign of death, to show the purpose of Jesus being born was to die. How can we, in giving our heart to God, bring myrrh? And maybe this is the biggest challenge of us, of all, for all of us, is death to self and life in and through Christ. That's a big ask. The King leaves us with quite a challenge. Can I live all and all for Jesus? That is a very, very hard thing to do. Let's not pretend that being a Christian is easy, but it's not just the best, it's also the right way to live. So I hope that today will be a joyous day, but it will also be a day lived like the kings, like the wise men, like the Magi, that we will give our hearts to him. Amen.